My name's Eli Wood. I run Black Flag Design. It's a group of creative technologists building these products. But we're here to talk about SB 24205. This is the Consumer Protections Act for AI. May 17th, the bill was signed into law by Polis, I think unfortunately, to introduce these extensive consumer protections related to AI in the state of Colorado. Particularly, they zoomed in on what they deemed high-risk applications. We're going to talk about what they define high risk and what they mean by consequential decisions, because those are very important definitions. It's slated to take effect February 2026. And if our business doesn't innovate, we have no possible way to meet the criteria of the bill today. Good thing we've got 2 years to figure it out, really, maybe year and a half if it gets, if it doesn't get delayed. And I've got some ideas for how our small business will actually be able to meet these standards. And I think that's actually what I'm most excited to talk about is like, how do we meet this challenge, right? So I'll introduce the bill and this sort of notion of consumer protection. We'll delve into the specific provisions and what they mean, but we're not going to get jargon legally, right? But I really want to fast forward into the implications for organizations that are both developing and deploying AI, which in our case, we're doing both. Some will be developers, some will be deployers. My hypothesis is that most businesses in the future will be developers and deployers of AI. We'll talk about that. And then if we take that assumption or that hypothesis as, and assume that it could be true, I believe everybody will be required to comply, and we need to think about how we benefit by being compliant. And then we'll close on some of the future stuff. And there's some really exciting waves coming that are actively in research, and you can even get plugged in with at Rocky Mountain AI Interest Group. So the primary stack that we go with, I was mentioning to Al, we're really web stack. Full stop, right? And more, we're interested in serverless, using as little infrastructure as we actually can. We don't want to manage our infrastructure. We want to use big provider players to do that. And I think historically, right, like when you think about the typical like web development stack, it's flattening, right? As frameworks and standards come into play, we don't always use these. We use a lot of Supabase. We use a lot of Tailwind. I mean, all of these are interoperable, but I think my main point is that what we're seeing is we're actually using less and less diversity of technologies, and those provider players are definitely collapsing the stack that's required to get started with implementing these kind of technologies. What that means, though, is that the work moves. Right? The work does not go away. We just have to focus on something else that's now become more important. So when you step outside of just the technology stack and you think about the system to run a generative AI application, there's several key components. And sorry if the green's hard to read, but sort of the normal front-end user experience right at the top of this stack now is just one key aspect of many different touch points that you have with your users. So just take a conventional chatbot. All right. When I'm sending a chat back and forth to an API that's being orchestrated by an organization, oftentimes there's a database or a knowledge store, like a vector store, that holds, your chunked embeddings of data that you're retrieving and bringing back to people. At the same time, you're measuring, did the user like the reaction? Did they not? You're trying to parse and understand the conversation to understand if the AI was effective in the conversation. You're running evaluations in the back end on things like correctness, groundedness, relevancy, etc. And then you're also doing document grading on your knowledge store to understand if what you're providing to your users is good. All of this is orchestrated right now for us in the web. We're using providers to do this, but as information systems focused people in this class, the sheer amount of potential for PII passing through the system is obscene. The ability to identify, recognize, and respond to detrimental behavior, profanity, illicit content, it becomes very difficult very quickly. Right. And so we're using a lot of open source software and key service providers to create these in a matter of hours rather than building all of our own infrastructure to manage it. And so we'll talk about some of those providers, but this is really like, we don't go into work, I feel like, talking about our tech stack. We go into work talking about these topics that touch the whole stack every time you manipulate one, right? And so the subject of our conversations has shifted. Now, when I think about sort of like where things are going in this provider nature, what we've talked about is really the application layer at this point, right? I've showed you some of the work, talked about the apps we're building. In some cases, we're using models that are made available by different organizations. Some of them are, open source, some are closed source. You can even access models that have been published, right, through these model hubs like Hugging Face, which you might have heard of. If not, I think you're going to be hearing it a lot. Hugging Face is just blowing up. And the idea is that regardless of the way that you tackle these systems right now, at the end of the day, you are relying on bedrock infrastructure that you will not get away from providers. Those monopolies on the bottom are your Amazon, your Google, your Microsoft, your Meta, and then even one layer lower, right, getting down into the hardware layer, we can honestly probably strike the TPUs from Google, and it's just NVIDIA. I mean, they are now the most valuable organization in the world because of that monopoly. Full stop. And so if you're talking to me about regulation that is going to regulate the application layer and the use of AI, we need to start here. Just this is the problem that has emerged from 30 years of being absent from the technological revolution, right? Our legislators didn't participate at this level to prevent this from happening. And instead, I think we're chasing the wrong rabbit right now. And I think that's like the scrutiny that these organizations will face is justified, and it is required to build ethical and effective systems. I pay a de facto tax to Amazon every month just to keep my lights on. They run my website. They run the infrastructure that I deploy to my clients. I'm not paying that tax to the federal government right now. I'm just required to pay Amazon just to be a functioning business. We should be talking about that. And we should be talking about the control that they're going to have in deploying these models, making changes to them, and how that makes some of the requirements of the bill almost completely untenable to keep up with from my perspective without being really creative about it. I will say we have some creative ideas how to meet this standard. So what standards are in the bill? I think you have to start at the EU, right? Like that is a super important salient point that you made. The EU was one of the first to come to market with a true AI regulation. I think it just went into effect August 2024. So it is officially in action, and then clients have until 2026, or customers have until 2026 to fully realize it. And what's really important about the EU framework is that they give you these terms of unacceptable risk, high risk, specific transparency requirements, and then minimal or no risk. And you'll see that the EU has explicitly stated use cases like social scoring that will be prohibited under this act. Thumbs up. Good job, EU. We don't want social scoring. We don't want AI determining the livelihood, the health, wealth, in sort of societal organization in any way, right? It's not for the robots. Now, what's permitted and subject to regulation and requirements, and some things that are permitted, right? And so when you look at that timeline they brought up, right, they were super early, 2018, because they know Facebook, all of Instagram, all of these systems already have algorithms that are running recommendation engines. That was the origin, right, of this. Evolved over time. ChatGPT launches November 2021. And you can see that it changed shape. And then as time progressed, coming into Q2 2024, around April, I think it was like April 15th was when Colorado SB 205 was introduced. That is very intentional. Connecticut waited, Colorado waited, California waited, New York waited. All of them waited until the final language of the EU Act was codified so that they could then position off of it. So the Connecticut bill that was introduced at the same time was a literal copy of the Colorado bill. Like, no bullshit. So I don't know if you as Coloradans want just duplicate bills just being thrown around just because people want to make a splash, right? So Colorado wanted to be early. That was even a part of the Senate Judiciary Committee hearings. They want to be seen as a leader, but we all know that, the road to hell is paved with bad and, with good intentions, right? And so just because you want to be a leader, just because you want to start the conversation, sometimes if you start it at the wrong point, you completely miss the whole hardware and sort of Google, Amazon, Meta monopoly. The act is short. It's only 26 pages. It's a great read. I think it's well written. I don't really have any criticisms over it. I live with an attorney. We nerd out about this stuff together. So we just poured over it, and I'm not going to bore you with all of the statutes and the kind of relationships of them, but I just want to give you the key terms that are going to be salient and prescient into really at least 2026 until they land. So the main focus is to protect against algorithmic discrimination, and they have a stated focus on what they call high-risk AI and the impact it has in consumers on consequential decisions. Those are really the three key vocabulary terms, right? And so when we think about algorithmic discrimination, right, what the hell does that mean, right? When you start to dig into that, people like National Institute on Standards and Technology have been talking, sort of OECC have been talking about algorithmic discrimination for a long time, and the way that systemic bias, computational bias, human bias influences the technology systems that we're all responsible for setting up, maintaining, and delivering, right? And so bias appears in all of our work, right? I'm not a psychologist, but I'm going to respond to a problem differently than every single one of you because of the inherent bias that I hold on my upbringing, where I come from, what food I ate earlier, if I'm feeling bad, maybe I'm alone. It's going to be very difficult to truly pin down how do you regulate algorithmic discrimination, because it is a very complex psychological topic that doesn't hold its roots in technology. It holds its roots in the human condition, right? And so I think it's kind of a fallacy to even focus on just algorithmic discrimination. I would much rather be specifically regulating revenge porn or specifically regulating doxing. There's so many other things to specifically focus on than just algorithmic discrimination. That being said, to really understand what high risk means, you got to start at risk, right? So risk, as defined in these frameworks, is a composite measure of an event's probability of occurring and the magnitude at which it can occur. And so then if we think about high-risk AI, the way that the bill frames it are systems that introduce risk and are used to make consequential decisions, right? And so the consequential decisions that they line out are things like determining education enrollment, determining insurance rates and underwriting, representing legal services, healthcare services, government services. All of these will be subject to the bill to be able to be deployed, which I think is a great call. I would not go to bat with Senator Rodriguez on what they're laying out here, but I don't think they went far enough if you're going to go with this, right? I really genuinely think if something could be tied back to a health, life, safety event, that should have been listed here, even as a broader term. I would like to see us focus on more explicit items like revenge porn, recreating people's personas and likeness without their permission. I wish more of that was focused here rather than these sort of what reads as broad business verticals. I don't think they're actually talking about the relevant decisions that will go into these. I also believe that when you look at the framework diagram that we showed with the monopolies, if I'm using OpenAI or Google Cloud as my large language model provider and they make a change, how does my reporting requirement change now? I don't even have control over those systems, but I'm definitely a consumer of them. And so how do I know when they've made a change that could impact one of these to even be aware of, right? So we're going to get into this spider web of okay, if we're in education, but we're not doing enrollment, but we're helping people who are talking about enrollment through these AI systems, but then they use that guidance 6 months later to set up a system that where how do I know if I'm contributing to a consequential decision is a very difficult question to answer with this bill. It's overtly broad while also being a bit prescriptive to business verticals. I also would really recommend anytime you read bills, you should always go to the appendix that's published on the site because they tell you how much it's going to cost the consumer. So if you get fined for this, it's going to cost you $20,000 ticket for every deceptive trade practice you've implemented. I think $20,000 is like 0.0005% of like 1 year of Microsoft. Like, what are we talking about here? Like they wouldn't even flinch, right? And so $20,000 speaks to the application layer. It speaks to the developers and puts the onus on us. That being said, this bill is estimated to cost Colorado about $670,000 next year, $650,000 next year as they like spin up the office. They deal with the complaints that come in. Right, they're going to start running that function now, so that they can start to build out like what it looks like to actually service the bill. There's some other interesting points there when you read it. Like the appendix is actually like super legible. It's like it's a good summary, right? If you're interested in what's going to happen. And so it talks about how like the sort of law department is going to have to act, what's going to happen in the judiciary. Pretty neat stuff. Skip over that. So what does it mean, right? And I wanted to kind of delve into the provisions of the bill a little bit more to talk about specifically like what it means to develop around it. And I thought this was a funny example of, you can see that since ChatGPT was introduced, the amount of times that delve appears in scientific research has skyrocketed because they're all fucking using ChatGPT to write their papers now. Like very clearly, right? And so we have to be very careful about the risks, right? People get really excited. They start to adopt the technology, and all of a sudden we're watering down scientific peer-reviewed research. That's the problem we're in right now from a usage perspective. And so beyond just knowing what risks I'm incurring, what impacts I'm incurring, kind of getting at the emotional change management point I was making before we started, the actual like rubber hitting the road that's going to be very difficult is a human capital problem of, enforcing, if people see something, say something. How do I set up the culture that this is something we care about? How do I know what our tolerance for risk is, knowing that we have fiduciary obligations if we're a public organization, right? How do we make all of these decisions knowing that today data is fragmented and siloed, right? Like the organizations are fragmented and siloed. So a lot of the common problems identified by NIST are things like just even being able to track risk, knowing what a risk metric is, getting access to data that can give you a composite metric of risk. All of that is very difficult to do today in these enterprises. And so the requirements for the bill that actually are imposed are organizations developing and deploying AI must implement a risk management policy and program that is aligned with a standard set like NIST. There will be other competing standard sets that come out. There always are. But NIST is by far the best one right now. You're also required to implement and track monitoring and system updates over the lifecycle of the AI system. And then there's also specific requirements imposed on developers. And I use this image kind of jokingly of like, do we really want that guy being the risk guy? You know what I mean? Like these engineers that eat Hot Pockets and drink soda. And like, I mean, that's all of those tropes are still like quite relevant, right? And we've got like the white guy in San Francisco that's a dropout making consequential system decisions. Like, what are we talking about here? So these developers are supposed to summarize intent, how they train them, any risks they've identified, right? All that's great and, needs to be reported, but I'm not convinced that's the person that's the problem. This quote is kind of tongue in cheek as well, that, the pursuit of truth will set you free, even if you never catch it. And so I believe that the requirement of impact assessments to be done within 90 days after modification is made. How many commits did we push today? At least, right? We squashed like one commit that was 14, we squashed a PR that was 14 commits. And so if every time I commit and push to production, I'm supposed to update my impact assessment, how is that possible within 90 days, right? If I've changed the system, most likely 1,000 times in that 90 days, in all reality, right? It's untenable. And then finally, you're supposed to notify consumers now before any consequential decision is made. Awesome. Good job, Senator Rodriguez. Great. Is that really going to make people read it and not just check the box? No, right? It's the same problem. It's the same T's and C's, same acceptable use shit. It's still a huge problem. And so if I have to throw a modal up and say, this is a consequential decision, how many of you would close that page? I would. I'm probably going to bail, right? It's not helping entrepreneurs. It's not helping business. It's not beneficial for anybody other than being able to say that we require consumer notification and consent. So how do people actually implement it, right? Those 4 pillars that I presented are really the core of the bill, right? Just a quick recap. Risk management policy and program documented. Developer documentation requirements as a part of your code of conduct documented. Make sure you have consistent impact assessment templates that you can run every time a system is updated within 90 days. And you have clear consumer notification and rights disclosures, right? If you do those 4 things, you are adhering to the bill. Great job. NIST recommends following some of these tools, right? So they have this core resource. They've got a roadmap so you can plot out how to be risk mitigating. They've got a playbook so that you can use these methodologies to avoid the risks from these types of bills or, risk hurting somebody else. It's a mess. It's just a total mess.
So that based on small business numbers, like we have a certain amount of employees or certain.
There is a new sort of caveat that was introduced that said that organizations under 50 people will have special requirements that should be less stringent, but they haven't identified what explicitly those are. They've spun up like a task force that's meant to define more explicitly those kind of thresholds. I mean,
You will probably just try to keep your employee happy.
which won't be a hard thing to do with AI. And so I think that's also a problem with the bill, is that it's sort of contrived in this archaic idea of bodies in a room making decisions when 89% of software is developed distributed, right? So people aren't gathering that. It's not like there's a centralized 50 people making a consequential decision. There's hundreds of developers touching a live application, making many decisions that could impact that. Right? So it's fraught with issues, and there's really no clear way to actually implement these frameworks until today. Now, I've got some ideas, right? So let's talk about it. So I'll speed up and then we'll wrap up. I believe that most businesses in the future will be developers and deployers of high-risk AI systems. They'll all be using foundational models that they have no control over, that they don't know about, that they won't be able to report on accurately. And I believe as the bill is written, many businesses will be unable to report and will be set up for really failure and just set up to be targeted with these kind of consumer protection complaints. The reason that is because today, right, if you were to install the AI risk mitigation framework of sort of mapping out your risk, measuring your risk, managing it, right, this is all out of NIST. You want to govern that risk through some kind of GRC board. No business has those functions today, right? No small business is going to be able to do those things while also just trying to maintain a 28% margin and trying to keep their 13 people fed and happy and employed. At larger organizations, I believe what you're going to see happen is they'll establish, are you familiar with Spotify tribe and squad models? It's a very sort of friendly management framework in software teams where you organize groups in tribes and squads. They work on discrete tasks, but then, have some shared commonality in product families or technology stacks. And I think what we're going to see happen is you'll see these risk mitigation teams pop up as guilds. They're going to be much more self-organizing first. You're going to have a lot of people that really care about the ethics of AI. And I think these are actually going to proactively pop up as communities inside of businesses before they're formalized in the sort of framework type of view. But whenever you look at it like this, right, and somebody's like, hey, you want to come join the AI risk team? We do this, right? Or, hey, you want to come be on the AI risk measure team? We do this. It's like, no, right? Like it's so esoteric. It's so disconnected from the product. It's so disconnected from the people. All of it is self-referential about risk and about managing risk and about compliance. And none of it serves entrepreneurial innovation whatsoever in any way. And I think we need to rethink that. And so there's easy ways to get around a lot of the reporting requirements, right? This is another issue, is that if you go with a service like Azure's OpenAI service, which is something we're using in the Wildfire project, you can create kind of what we call anecdotally as these private filing cabinets, right? And so Azure, Microsoft has their partnership with OpenAI where they host the models in your Azure instance. No tokens ever leave your Azure, no completions. There's no opportunity for data to leave your system other than like an external prompt injection attack in transit. That is like the closest way that somebody could get to you, right? So concerns of sensitive classified material, doable given what happened with Jedi and where we're at. This can happen in AWS, it can happen in Azure, no problem, right? Your data is controlled, secure, as long as it's within your perimeter, no problem. So I'm not just relying on OpenAI, I have much more control. I own the whole system, right? Now, what I think is more important than this, though, is that AI is going to allow brands to grow and existing brands to connect or redefine the way that they show up. And so on the privacy security front, I don't think that privacy and security is a differentiator in the way that it was in the early 2010s, right? Like there's a lot of people really like sort of championing privacy, security, anonymity, temporal storage, et cetera. Now we're in the days of like zero trust infrastructure, which is all fabulous. But I think that the values at the core of these brands will actually be what shines through, right? Anybody can spin up an Azure instance and throw up an OpenAI service and have a completions model in a day. I mean, it's not like we're talking about massive motions that we have to put in place, right? It's literally a button that says deploy Azure OpenAI service, right? So what is the actual work, right? I think it's the question we should be asking ourselves. If more and more of our work in sort of platform engineering and DevOps is automated, from my point of view, this is where the work is going to be. It's going to be on brand. It's going to be connecting with people and how business shows up. And so take somebody like Apple, right? They've taken all of this federal guidance and they've distilled it down into 4 pillars, right? And so they're just rallying people behind empowering people with intelligence, designing and approaching craft and approaching care, representing the people that we build for. And that's diversity, that's equity, and that's inclusion, belonging, and then of course, privacy at its core. And I think the key point here that they make and why I'm really hot on if OpenAI is the Netscape of today, I think Apple's going to just win the whole game. I really do. And their private cloud compute is we'll talk a little bit about that. So how do you operate in this new world, right? Like, how do I actually implement these things? So internal risk management process, right? I've got to install all of these things to be compliant with the bill. I've got to have regular assessments. I've got to document a record keep for 3 years. I personally am introducing what's called joint accountability agreements, which is very common in distributed teams, people like GitLab and GitHub and some of the distributed sort of leaders, even pre-COVID, joint accountability agreements that every employee signs and commits to is going to be very important, because I guarantee you the moment that a consequential decision is lopped, onto somebody and they're in a lawsuit, it was the developer in Kansas that did it. We're going to fire him, right? Or fire her, fire them. We solved it. They're the ones that did that, right? And it's not going to be enough. And so the joint accountability agreements will, I think, be able to help actually protect employees. Transparency requirements, we've already talked about the assessments, and then legal, IT, and compliance are going to have to work together. There's no way to get it done without them. And so you have to conduct your impact assessments. There's a great template from TMC. If you guys are interested in what it looks like to actually document this stuff, it's just everybody just going like, I think that's risky. I'm going to write that down. There is no consensus on what it actually means to be at what level of risk. Right now, it's self-declared, right? So if I categorize it and rationalize it in a certain way, I'm not high risk until I get the complaint, until I get the fine, until I go through the suit, right? And have to figure it out. Finally, almost done. So where do we go, right? We've talked about the onerous requirements, talked about how manual it is, how it's focused on human capital. It's not really talking about actual systems that sort of result in these decisions that can happen. So where do we go? Information, privacy, security. I think there's actually a lot of optimism around here, bringing control back to the consumer. And that primarily is because of what are referred to as on-device models. So these on-device models take you from the situation I described of sending things over the wire out to OpenAI and back, can be intercepted, can be injected, expanded upon. I could get DDoS easily this way if somebody just slams my rate limits, right? They could take my whole system down very easily, actually, except in the wildfire project since it's Azure, right? I mean, the education product, it's more open. Where we're going to go to, I think even in the next 18 months, we're going to go to a system that's much more focused on customer control, where the entire system runs locally on device hardware and never leaves the chip. So the model will be installed. It will progressively deploy local temporal storage that is vectorized, right? And creates the embedding so that the knowledge can be retrieved and grabbed. And then I think when you turn off the app, it's going to clear it. And so then my question to Mr. Rodriguez and, our wonderful legislators is, how do I report on that? How do I know the recommendation that it made if I'm doing a zero data retention policy or if I have a zero trust policy? I never even see what they input. All I have is a unique user hash, right? It's the problem Telegram's getting into. It's the problem that a lot of these anonymized organizations are facing whenever they get hit with lawsuits and subpoenas. But this is where we're going to go. We can run these models. You can have your own chat GPT on your device that's disconnected from the internet today. You can just go grab it, jailbreak your phone and install it. Android, it's even easier. So on device will be the way. And it's explicitly why we chose not to pursue student use cases, right? Student data is subject to FERPA, like Federal Education Rights and Protection Act. And we will not touch student data until this is a viable path, at least for me. We don't even want to get close to it. We don't want to play with anybody under 13 where we are not interested, right? And I think we have to take those kind of tacks. Like as professionals, as people working in these businesses, you have to be able to say, no, we will not do that because I, according to my code of conduct and the accountability agreement I signed, believe that puts us in a risky position. And, oh, by the way, it's easy to document. The other thing that's only going to continue to proliferate, I believe, is serverless multi-tenant. So think of a single client-side application, right, that people are accessing with a federated data structure that is isolated per client, per customer. You're never commingling data. Everything is anonymized, separated. I'm less keen on single tenant, kind of this like duplicative model. I think we're going to see a lot of serverless multi-tenant. And it's already. I also think the information systems are actually going to be observation systems. I think it's going to be trying to track and understand what an AI did, why it did it, who it did it to, and how do we fix it, or how do we prevent it from happening again. I think that the information as the kind of the latent knowledge in these knowledge stores is actually relatively static and at rest, right? Until we go out and grab it. But what's so much more dynamic is the prompts, the data people upload into it, what they're inputting, how is the AI responding, how do we test this, how do we get any kind of confidence that we're not introducing problematic issues. This is actually going to be what we have to think about. How do we evaluate the AI in a structured way that produces things we can report on while also still providing a user experience and a product that's going to make us money? I can't just do this for free, right? And so it's actually relatively easy with some of the providers. We're really keen on Langsmith, where we can do all of these things. I highly recommend checking it out. Their playground is wonderful. You can actually talk to the AI and you can see the traces of knowledge, and you can actually look at how the AI constructed a response. And there's some pretty easy demos to just spin up, even in the web too, which is cool. So much of our work now is evaluating the AI, looking at traces and runs of the AI, trying to iterate on our prompts, going out, improving our context and the knowledge store that it's sitting on top of. And then what we have yet to do, but we would like to get into, is actual fine tuning, retraining our own models. If we fine tune and retrain, we can install it, run it in our own instance. There's a lot of power there, but it's just expensive, right? It is not really a tenable approach for many businesses. And so we talked about, businesses needing to be able to do these impact assessments. If I'm going to leave you with one thing, and I think my main criticism of the bill is that I think it's actually only going to result in AI doing the risk mitigation assessments. That's what we've just legislated ourselves into. You've layered on so many requirements into businesses that can make $10 million with 5 people because they've got a really good killer product. You've layered on all of these restrictions. And the only way that's actually going to be tenable to do it is by having AI assess itself and write the impact assessments itself. And so we actually have a stack that can do this, right? So you can use analytics for your system. You can run predictive analytics on your usage data, application context, and state, and run your AI-driven risk assessment on your information. You can use natural language processing to compare that to compliance documents, the bills, the statutes, the requirements. You can bring in even public discourse and public sentiment from things like social listening and what's going on there. You can then employ the latest fine-tuned models or even machine learning to actually go ahead and better pattern match and identify where these anomalies, where these high-risk instances have happened or risk events have actually happened. And then the most agile way to respond will be to just have an AI be the one to respond to it. A human's not going to be fast enough. And so personally, I think with a little bit of foresight and actual intentional collaboration with the professional community prior to writing the bill, I think this would have come up. Is why in the bill did we not say that we can't use an agent to just do it? And so if that's my out, that's the out I'm going to take, because it's only going to cost me 5 cents to make an impact assessment. That's the entrepreneur, right? That's the default mode of capitalism that we're in. So AI will most likely be the one doing risk management for us. And that's terrifying for sure. And so I don't leave you with a doom message, but to meet the requirements of the bill, I'm very optimistic that we can employ a system like this and we can meet the requirements of it until we tell them that it was an AI that wrote it. We'll see what they have to say about it. So where we go. Similar legislation is happening in New York. That was signed. California was also about to get signed, and Gavin Newsom vetoed it. And we can assume why, right? Apple, Facebook, Google, Amazon, they're all in his backyard, right? But there's a trend here. So you're going to see more consumer protections requirements. I looked today, and there's 114 federal acts currently under consideration related to artificial intelligence and consumer protections. 114 of them at the federal level, let alone what's happening at the state level. we will most likely fall very behind from a regulatory perspective and never catch up. But there's many people that want the Wild West, right? And I'm not necessarily one of those entrepreneurs that just believes in no regulation. Like I said, I think there's very clear things that I find unacceptable based on my moral code. But I know that that's not shared by everybody, right? And so I think there's going to be a lot of opt in. And then I think that really, if I can leave you with the brand point, I think the transparent AI observable systems that tell you what they're doing, it does actually improve the entire holistic nature of your business. Like if you can lean into that and operate in transparency, clarity, and be open source about what you're doing, I think it's actually going to improve your brand value versus keeping it too close to the vest, right? And so that's where I'm at. I'm sorry it took so long. It was a great conversation. Any questions, thoughts?